So photography after dark. There's lots of things we can take pictures of, and it looks like there's a couple of you that have some dark sky backgrounds, so that's pretty cool. And it really is truly amazing what you can see when you get away from all that light pollution kind of stuff. And I'm blessed down here in Rappahannock County, and some of the pictures you're going to see is from a project that I've been doing literally out my backyard and down the road. We have dark skies, and I would imagine that some of you up your way have got some pretty good dark skies without having to go too far. And certainly you get into West Virginia a little bit farther, there are some really good dark sky shooting places. So I'm just going to show samples of some of the things you find after dark. This is just down the road from me. And just made a nice panorama. And let's see. Sitting out. So I worked on this project for a number of years where I went and photographed people's homes under the dark sky to kind of personalize it, because we worked at, and we now have a dark sky, International Dark Sky Association recognized park in Rappahannock County. And we have 4 events a year where people bring telescopes and cameras and whatever and take pictures of the night sky. So I got access to a lot of properties, some really interesting kind of places, as well as just driving down the road and stopping. And it was a lot of fun. We'll talk a little bit about light painting and how to light up the foreground so that you don't just have silhouettes. This is one of our iconic locations out as you're heading out into the park. And it's not just about the Milky Way. There's a whole lot of things that you can photograph at night. This is down on one of those places is famous.
That's the Body Island. That's the Body Island Lighthouse in Nag's Head. I've got pictures of that as well.
Yeah. And that's a fun place to go down and shoot. I find once you've kind of done it, it's like, okay, I've kind of done it. But it gives you a lot of opportunity. We had a really foggy night, and so the fog actually changed the whole look of what we were taking pictures of. But you can still see the stars that are in there. And you can go out and do star trails. And wintertime is a great time for star trails. I think it was 10 degrees that night. Gets a bit chilly. The Perseid meteors are always fun to go chasing. Most of the time in this neck of the woods, it's cloudy on the best Perseid meteor night shooting. But that one night was a dark sky night, and all the sky glow that you see to the east, I had to do a lot of post-processing work, which we'll talk about a bit, but that's the Washington, D.C. direction. So I'm looking south and east, and we've got a ton of light pollution up there, but you can still get excellent shots. And you can go out and have fun with lightning bugs. So that's a whole nother dark sky project that's a blast. I do chase a lot of heavy equipment that the VDOT parks by the side of the road. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the light pollution that we get as well later on. But you can have fun with almost anything. The power lines and the power companies are not helping our light pollution aspect. So this is kind of a slightly cynical picture, but it was good fun. And this is just down the road from me. And you can lay on your back and take pictures. And I just put this, we're going to talk about processing, but straight out of the camera, things look a little bit muddier. And how you choose to process pictures gives you your end result. And there's lots of choices. So we'll talk about that. And I've had a lot of fun converting to black and white. I saw some work done by a photographer out west that was all black and white night photos. And I've been doing a lot more black and white conversions. What's really interesting is that when it comes to like camera club judges, they all hate them. I don't know why, but none of them have ever scored well under a judge. I guess people don't perceive it as a common black and white. It's not something that's commonly done. And yet it to me actually makes a very, very effective picture. So you can just see some different processing. This is just somebody's house in the county. And it's fun to light up the insides of the house as well as the outside. And there's just kind of a before and after, give you an idea of what you can do. And don't forget, there are other sources of light. This is a moonlit picture. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So why do we even care about dark skies other than to take pictures? But the reality is that dark skies are going away. And 99% of the people in the US and Europe see no stars, or they see 2 or 3 stars. 80% of the world lives under the glow of light. And that is your light dome. You see it in the background of a lot of your pictures, that kind of yellow sky glow that you see along the horizon. And you can even be in very dark areas out west here in this country, and you can still see that glow on the horizon. And it actually is an important thing for, there's a whole list of health reasons why we need dark skies. There's a whole list of issues that are happening in the natural world without having dark skies, from turtles that don't know which way to go back out to sea, to lightning bugs, which are not doing very well, to many of the flight of birds are being affected. So the dark sky issue is not something that we should take lightly. We should actually share our dark sky photographs so that people start to desire it, and they want to do things that will help preserve our skies for more reasons than just taking pictures. So this is a little bit of technicality, because you'll hear about this Bortle scale. And as you look around on some of the apps, you'll see the Bortle scale being talked about. And you'll see some of the parks will tell you what their Bortle scale is. And that gives you an idea of the quality of the photograph. So at class 1, there's very few of these places actually in the United States, but the Milky Way goes absolutely to the horizon, and it is an incredibly dark sky. So you get some of that out at the ocean. You'll get that in a few places out west. Class 2 and 3 are much more common. We are down here in Rappahannock County, we're on a 3 with sometimes a border to 4, because we're starting to lose some of the dark skies that were here when I moved here back almost 30 years ago. So, but you still can get excellent, excellent pictures. Once you get into this class 4 or 5, you have to work a lot to really see the details of the Milky Way, and they are not nearly as crisp. And then you get into 6, 7, 8, and 9, and you're starting to lose it completely. And you can go photograph city lights, but you can't really photograph the stars. So there's a lot of Bortle class charts out here, and as you look at starting to do some of that deeper sky photography, you can see all different structures and stars and all kinds of stuff like that. So what's interesting about light is how far it really carries. So if you see this red light that goes along the streak in the background, that is a single blinking light at an intersection over here to the left, just a short ways. That light is transmitting a quarter to a half a mile easily down the road until it runs into a hill. I have a friend actually lives way, way out in Colorado, and she has a neighbor that's a mile away, and she had to put curtains in her window because the neighbor installed a big outside light, and it shines noticeably into her window a mile away. So it will affect the way you do your images as well, and how the light affects your landscapes, how the light affects your image quality, basically. So welcome to Rappahannock County. The trees here nicely hide our horizon, so it looks like we have dark sky all the way to the ground. But we do lose it right on the edge. And this is just a bridge down the road from me. And what I've done to light the bridge and the trees is just a couple of little lights at the beginning of the road, aimed down the road. So for shooting, for optimal shooting at night, particularly thinking about the Milky Way, since that's commonly what people are interested in, especially if you're just getting started with dark sky photography, the Milky Way is one of the easiest things to get started with. So you want clear sky nights. If you have clouds, as you can see from some of those pictures, that we have the ability to add some interest to the sky with appropriate clouds, not clouds like we have tonight. You can have a little bit of fog in the landscape. That can add some interest. But if you have too much fog, it's going to make everything very, very soft. You want to be 2 hours after sunset. So in April or May, all the way through to July or August, you're staying up fairly late. September even starts to get a little bit better. So if sunset is at 9 or 9:30, you can't start shooting till 11 or 11:30. If you're shooting in October and it's dark at 6:30, you can start shooting at 8:30. You need to be 30 minutes before or after the moonrise or the moon set. And so what you look for, you end up with a minimum of 10 days each month that you can really do some decent shooting. There are more days than that, and I have a resource at the end for somebody that's got to put out a calendar for all the days and where the moon is and everything like that, that makes it easy to figure it out. It just depends on how late you want to stay and how long you want to shoot, because sometimes you may only have 45 minutes between your 2 hours after sunset and your moonrise, or half an hour before your moonrise, but that gives you 45 minutes. So you can pop out, take some pictures, and get to bed early. Other times you have the entire night and you end up staying up. You start shooting at 11:30 and you can shoot until 4:30 in the morning. Makes it hard to go to work the next day, but it's a lot of fun. Basically, our Milky Way is visible from March to October easily. You can go out in February. You have about a half-hour window, usually between 4:30 and 5:30 a.m., somewhere in that time frame. 3:30 just depends on the night, but you have a very short window. that the Milky Way core, the biggest part, what I call the fluffiest part of the Milky Way, is only visible for that short a period of time because the rest of the time is below the horizon. So the most of the Milky Way pictures you see in the Northern Hemisphere are March to October, and even March, you're going to be up at 3 a.m. You have to be up at 3 a.m. By the time you get into April, it gets a little better. May, you can have stuff going on at midnight easily, 11:30, and you just take a nap. So camera equipment, more and more cameras have the ability these days to take decent night photos. The better sensors, the full frame sensors still are probably a little bit better, but I've seen some pretty amazing night shots now, and even some of the Olympuses, which have the micro four thirds. There are really good cameras in most of the modern cameras. If you have a camera that you can go to the high ISO and you can set manual settings, you can get acceptable pictures even with some of the advanced point and shoot cameras. Maybe you're not going to be able to print them huge on your wall, but you can go out and have some fun and give it a try. And if you get hooked on it, then you'll probably want to upgrade your camera equipment, which happens to us all the time. And it doesn't take just the Milky Way to make you want to do that. This tripod thing, if you don't have a tripod or you don't want to use the tripod, stay in bed. No point in coming out. You're going to need the tripod because your exposures are long. And yes, you can set it up on a rock and balance it, and that will work just fine, but it's sitting on a rock. It really helps to have a cable release or a camera app that will release your camera and not give you any camera shake. Having said that, I have a big heavy tripod I very often use, and I can release it with my finger carefully and not introduce any camera shake. You can also set a timer on your camera for a second or two before the picture starts to take, and that will give you a steady shot. The intervalometer, which is a big word for a timer, but it allows you to set your time that you want exactly. A lot of the newer cameras have the intervalometers in them, and so you don't need something separate. I still am shooting with what now seems like ancient history, a Nikon D810, and I still have an external intervalometer. I think there's some timers on inside it, but I just like my external because I've gotten used to it. But that's basically a timer. What you do need is the ability to have some kind of a wide angle lens. Usually the wider the better. So I shoot with, on a full frame camera, 12 to 24, 14 to 24. But if you don't have that, it's okay, because you can still get pictures of the sky. It's just when you want to add the foreground and have some Milky Way, it really helps to have that wide angle feature. It also helps with the wider the angle, the easier it is to get your foreground in focus as well as your stars. And that's one of the challenges, if you will, of photographing a foreground and the sky as your background. The faster the lens, the better off you're going to be. So an f2.8 is great. 1.4 is even greater. And there are now getting to be quite a few lenses being sold at 1.4. Some of them are bigger, bulkier, and almost always way more expensive. But if you're going to do a lot of this, it can be a really good investment. Is you're playing around with some of your less advanced cameras or your less open lens or less big lenses. If 4.5 is as low as you can get, which is pretty common with a lot of lenses, then you've really got to kick up your ISO. You've got to have a high ISO capability. And we'll talk about the ISO and what levels to look for a little bit later. But these are the features that you need equipment-wise to in order to go out and be successful. So a couple of little, is there any questions on camera stuff? Sometimes where people have questions.
What about the lens tracker or the star trackers? You need one of those?
So you do not need a star tracker, which for those that don't know, a star tracker will actually, the reason that the stars, like you can have a light trails or star trails, is because the Earth is moving. And so if you have a long exposure and the Earth is moving, the stars come out as streaks. A star tracker is set up so that it will move your camera at the same rate the Earth is moving. And so you can have much, much longer exposures. And that's how you can do some of this deep sky photography. You can have a 1 hour exposure. Some of this astronomy exposure stuff is incredible. And, 1, 2, 3, 4 hour exposures, getting some of these stars, and those are all done with trackers. But you do not need a tracker to get out there and have fun and play. Any other questions? Okay. The one tip, especially here in the East, is watch out for dew on your camera. As the temperature drops, there is a point at which, and there's a good weather, there's weather information that tells you why dew forms. But the bottom line is metal outside, sitting in the middle of a field for a couple of hours, is going to collect dew at a certain dew point, temperature and humidity. So we can have a really dry night with maybe a light breeze and you won't see any dew at all. We can have another night in which the dew collects as fast as you can wipe it off. And you end up, some nights you just get totally frustrated and take off your t-shirt and start wiping on your lens just to try and dry it off. Kevin Adams, his link will be at the end. He's got some a handy holder thing with Velcro on it that holds some of these hand warmers. Duct tape holds hand warmers on really nicely and just keeps the temperature of the metal high enough so that dew doesn't form. You can get an Arctic jacket, which is basically an insulated thing that they use for taking a lot of the auroras when they want to be out for hours. And you can just do the old-fashioned wipe it off. And when you start to notice that your pictures have an ethereal quality, it usually means you have dew on the front of your lens and things are looking foggy. And you look up and you think, the sky is really clear, but my picture looks really fuzzy. It's fuzzy because you have dew on your lens. And if you don't pay attention to it, you get back home and you realize that you really goofed. So when you're out there, it takes you 20 minutes for your eyes to really truly adjust and see all the stars. And even then, if you're out for an hour, you'll see a lot more stars than you do even at 20 minutes. So the red lights that everybody's using, you want to use red lights because that does not affect your night vision. What is happening though, is that if you go to a popular area, you saw how far the light traveled in that image that I showed you earlier. Well, if somebody 5 cars down from you, standing at the overlook, is shining their red light all over their camera trying to see, your camera will pick it up. And so you will see red lights on the trees around you. You will see red lights on the ground. Whatever the foreground is, you will see it in red. So because of this, and because there are more and more people getting interested in not only in night photography, but actually just being in the parks at night, means that there are actually some parks that are beginning to limit night shooting. Part of it is because of light painting, which we'll talk about in a minute. And part of it is because people get so frustrated because there are so many lights of people trying to see their cameras. And it becomes very frustrating. So if you're out with a bunch of other people, communicate, see if you can coordinate things, ask if somebody else is shooting before you turn your light on and wreck their picture. Yes, we can delete it and we can take another one, but if there's 20 people, somebody's going to have their light on at some point. So try to be considerate. Otherwise, we're going to find a lot of our parks getting closed off to night shooting. And I added this thing about being safe. As a woman, I have been out by the side of the road on a Saturday night out here in the country, and you get people that drive by and you've had a couple of drinks and they honk their horn and you have no idea. They're got a rifle in the back of their car. You have no idea what their intentions are. So you have to be really aware of your surroundings. You can't see the ground to walk. So be careful. If you're not a super coordinated person, make sure that you are lighting the ground where you're walking. Drivers can't see you if you're parked by the side of the road. You don't want to leave your blinkers on because guess what? That's red light. It's going to light up everything. And so you need to park your car safely by the side of the road if that's where you're shooting, and be well off the road so you don't cause any wrecks. I've been stopped by a number of cops. And actually, interestingly enough, in Virginia, and I've even been stopped in the daylight by cops, you are not allowed to park on the shoulder, the VDOT owned shoulder of the road to take pictures. You're allowed to stop and repair your car, but not take pictures. So they can technically give you a hard time. And I had a friend of mine actually that had a very hard time, and he was packing a bit of heat, totally licensed, totally legal, but he had a very interesting night with the policeman because he was parked on the shoulder. So know your laws. You can park in somebody's driveway, which is private property, as long as you're not blocking the person who really wants to come out. So you have to be watchful and careful with what you do. Okay, so we'll get into the nuts and bolts of shooting sharp stars. So most of the time when we're shooting the Milky Way, we're not looking for the streaks of the star trails. We're looking for sharp pinpoint stars. So the secret is here, and there are calculations on the internet of exactly how, based on your focal length, and based on your particular lenses, of what the optimum shooting is. Ultimately, you need to find out what works with your camera, your lens setup, and do a little bit of experimentation. Personally, I find anything over 20 seconds, even with my 14 millimeter wide angle, does not give me that perfect pinpoint kind of a star. And so to me, 20 seconds, you'll see in a lot of publications, you'll see 25 to 30 seconds. You are not getting real pinpoint stars unless you've got probably a fisheye. But if you are working with a lens that may not be the best or a camera that doesn't have all that great ISO, go for a longer shutter speed. Get the pictures as best as you can, because it's fun, it's addicting, and then you'll get a better lens or a better camera if you really want to pursue it. But don't feel that if you have to shoot at 30 seconds that you shouldn't bother to take the picture. Go ahead and take it, but recognize that you won't be getting that pinpoint star, and don't be disappointed. Be happy with the fact that you're getting cool night shots. A lot of times the intervalometers inside the camera will not let you set things except like 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 25 seconds. Again, some of the newer cameras, they do allow you to do that. If the intervalometer that I use and my favorite shooting is 17 seconds for most of the lighting conditions that we have around in this part of the world, which as you go out to the dark skies out west is not enough. It's because our skies are lighter here that the 17 seconds work. And I find that I have to go up to 20, and sometimes 22 seconds or a higher ISO in those really, really dark sky parks out west. Well, you're going to be shooting in RAW if you can at all possibly. However, I've had at least one night, if not a couple, where for some reason my camera got knocked around in the case, and I found out that I was shooting in JPEG. And the pictures came out okay. They aren't, you don't have nearly the information, but they will come out. You can get pictures. If you do shoot in a JPEG, or if your camera doesn't do RAW, definitely set your white balance ahead of time, because you're not going to be able to change it nearly so easily afterwards. I find that the tungsten white balance gives me the most sort of realistic looking, or what I would call realistic looking picture. But it doesn't matter, because as you bring it into your RAW converter, you can set your white balance, as you will see later on, you can set your white balance anywhere you like. The real key, one of the most important things that you can do, is to check your histogram. Here you are with your eyes adjusted to the dark, and now you have a backlit, bright viewfinder or back of the camera, and it's going to look really, really bright. You look at your histogram and 85% of it's going to be piled up on the left. And you look at it and it looks bright, but I guarantee you when you get back, you will be a very unhappy person, because it will be too dark. There'll be too much noise in it. You want the histogram most of the time is going to be shifted to the left, but you would like it to be from the left to the center, as close towards the center as you can get. And you'll get used to it once you bring some of those back to your computer. But use that histogram, because it's critical, especially when you're starting out. So if you want to see more stars, just gazillions of stars, you need more time and you'll see lots of stars. If you want to see the constellations stand out, the brighter stars, then you actually do want that darker exposure. You want more of your histogram over to the left, because then only the brightest stars are going to show. Much of the time, if we're after the Milky Way, we're not really worried about individual constellations, but there's lots of other things to take pictures of in the sky besides the Milky Way. And so a lot of times we want that more time, more stars type of an exposure. For star trails, we're going to shoot differently. We want the lower ISO. We want a long exposure, which is why we need the lower ISO. And we want to reduce the noise. Do not, really for any of this, turn off your long exposure noise reduction. Because what happens when you turn on long exposure noise reduction is that you will take your picture for 17 seconds, or in this case, 4 minutes, and then the camera will do another picture for 17 seconds or 4 minutes. And you have to sit there and twiddle your thumbs and have more coffee and twiddle your thumbs some more. And you can't shoot repeatedly. And when you're doing star trails, you'll have all of these gaps in it. So you can shoot to be able to compensate for hot pixels, which you will get with some of these long exposures. You can take an image with your lens cap on for 4 minutes, and that will serve as a reference image for your processing later on. And there's lots of help on the internet as to how to process those. This is where you set your intervalometer, and you can shoot for an hour, you can shoot for 2 hours, you can shoot for 3 hours. Just depends on how many star trails you want and what you're after. What we usually do is set up a shoot for 4 minutes, 1 second break, and another 4 minutes. That allows the intervalometer to basically reset. And you have to have your camera on bulb for your intervalometer to be taking over anyway. And then for star trails, go have a nap in your car, climb in your tent, go have some coffee, because the camera can do it all. When it's done, go collect your gear and at least hope and pray that it worked, because that could be 1, 2, 3 hours for one picture. And if your battery has failed, if your intervalometer didn't actually go off, or you had it set incorrectly, you come back an hour or 2 later and guess what? You have nothing. Ask me how I know that. Plenty of personal experience. So then you can go and have another nap when you go to process these things, because you're very often processing anywhere from 20 to 100 pictures, depending on how you have shot it. And even the best computers will take some time actually processing it. So it gives you the opportunity to have another nap. Any questions? Okay. So one of the best kept secrets, which I see a lot of people don't talk much about, is doing a test shot before you take your real picture. So there are people who say, oh yeah, you got to go out while it's still daylight and set up your stuff, and then you got to wait 2 hours. Give me a break. I want to drive up, take my picture, or hike up and take my picture and then leave. And when I was doing this project, sometimes I'd have a couple of properties scheduled for an evening. And so I need to get my job done and move on to the next spot. Or I'm standing by the side of the road and I certainly am not going to sit up there for 2 hours. So the easiest way to do that is take your camera, set it to its highest ISO possible. Mine is 52,100. Set your camera to bulb so that when you hold down your shutter, the camera shutter is open. When you hold down your button, your shutter is open. Set up your composition, and you can set up your composition, and all you need is 2 or 3 seconds. You just hold the shutter open, take your picture. Oh, I'm off kilter. So you level your camera. Oh, I don't have enough foreground. So you add some more foreground. You tilt your camera a little bit. Oh, I think I'm going to try a vertical. So you set your camera up for vertical. You can spend 5 minutes, you can spend 20 minutes setting up your shot, but you're only wasting a second or 2 or 3 on the actual test capture. You do not care what the noise is on those, because I'll show you how you delete all of those at the beginning of your processing. So, but you can get your composition absolutely the way you want it. If you have to wait 17 seconds for every adjustment or 20 seconds for every adjustment, oh, I think I really want to move my camera over 1/2 inch or you know, aim for this tree over here. What you're going to end up doing is compromising your picture, because you're not going to want to wait another 17 or 20 seconds for the sample picture to take. But you hold down the shutter for a couple seconds, take a sip of coffee, and you've got a test shot. Some of them will be overexposed, some of them will be underexposed. It's not a big deal. Then, when you've got your composition the way that you want it, you can reset your ISO to your working ISO. So a lot of times that working ISO is going to be around 4,000 to 6,400. Out west, actually, I did a lot of shooting at 10,000 ISO in order to capture the dark skies out there. You set your timer and you take your picture. Now, if you forget to reset your ISO after 17 seconds, your picture will be white and you will go, oh no, what happened? Oh, I forgot to reset my ISO. So that goes into the delete category. So you reset your ISO and take your picture. And your pictures, when they first come out of the camera, are not that pretty necessarily. You may have too much light over here. You may have not quite enough light over there. And your overall picture is going to look a lot muddier than what you are going to see in the end. But that's the easy way to walk up to a location, or do 5 different compositions in one location. Once you've got your picture, made sure there's no airplanes flying through it, then you take your picture and then you move to another location. It's really easy. Turn your ISO up and test. We can also a lot of times shoot, if we're shooting landscapes, we may want to shoot to combine exposures. And I've got a sample of this coming up. We can't light that large landscape. We can with moonlight, but maybe we're out doing Milky Way and we don't want any moonlight, because the moonlight will fade the Milky Way. You'll see some of the other stars, but you won't necessarily see the Milky Way. You won't see the Milky Way on a big moonlit night. So here we're going to take 2 pictures. One is exposed for the landscape. And a lot of times I'll take that at a lower ISO to reduce noise. And it's whatever it is. It could be 90 seconds. It could be 4 minutes. It could be 3 minutes, whatever it takes for you to get a nice exposure that you like of the landscape. So that's the number 1 picture. And then the number 2 picture is you expose for the stars, just like you have, like we've been talking about. So once you've got those 2 pictures, Then you can blend them in Photoshop, and there are newer blending programs. Me and Photoshop have a lot of issues together, but that's kind of what I have learned. But there are definitely, however you wish to blend pictures is how you go ahead and blend them. So here I've shot for the Milky Way and then processed it. And everything here is in shadow. So I don't want that. I want to see the details of my landscape. So here I've got the details of my landscape, but the Milky Way is all blown out. And if you look at it, you can actually see that the stars are actually turned into streaks. And so then you blend those two together and you get landscape and Milky Way. And there's no way to light this huge landscape. But you can see there are people in the arch. This is out in Arches National Park. In the arch, they are lighting up the arch itself, which was enhanced my picture. But I had to make sure that I didn't have too much of their light and blow out the actual arch itself. So I was kind of using their light painting in the arch as part of my picture. So lighting is the big thing to talk about. There is Royce Bear, whose information is at the end, is one of the people who kind of originated the idea of low-level lighting, LLL. And what has been happening in the national parks in particular is that people are light painting with big torches, and they're light painting pieces of landscapes. This is problematic from the standpoint of other photographers, and it's very problematic for other people in the parks who are just wanting to enjoy the night sky. And that has actually caused several parks to prohibit nighttime photography. And Royce and a bunch of people out west are working really, really hard to get permission for low-level lighting to be allowed and not banning people from photography totally. But we can lose our privileges if we keep up with these big, huge lights. And in truth, you don't need much light at all. So these hay bales are actually lit by a passing car. And as you can see, the lighting on them is actually fairly harsh. It's too much light. So as we look at some of the other pictures, you'll see, and I'll point out where I've lit it and how I've lit it. Remember, we have a 17 to 20, 15 to 20, 25-second exposure. That means the shutter is open for those 15, 20, 25 seconds, gathering light. That's what it does. It's gathering light on the sensor. So a little bit of light goes a long way. So what we want to do is make use of that. And a lot of times when I'm doing a building or a smaller structure, if you were to drive by, you would probably not even notice that there was somebody standing out there with a light. The building itself does not appear to the naked eye to be lit. And yet there's plenty of light to show the detail of the building. One tip with lighting is that depending on what you are taking, you may want to take it as a silhouette as well, which I did with the Perseid meteor shot. I light painted the tree, but I didn't like any of those. I liked it with the silhouette. If you have clouds in the sky, take a bunch of pictures, because as those clouds move over the sky, they are going to block out some of your Milky Way, but they are going to add some effect to it. So you want to pick the ones that give you the effect that you like. And so sit there and take 5 or 10 pictures. and see where what the clouds are doing. So these are a couple of different ways of lighting pictures, and we're going to go through. So here I'm lying on my back, on the left here, lying on my back, and I just have, I think I set the light on top of my car. I may have set it on the ground because I was in a parking area. And I'm just shining the light up the trees and up the branches. So instead of silhouetting them, you're getting some light on and some color consequently on the trees. This is a very, very dim light. And yet it's plenty. If you had any more light, it would start to blow things out. And it would start to look a little bit less like a night sky. Here in the vegetable field, this is an organic farm. There's no Milky Way in the direction that I could look on that farm. And we have the clouds, which are adding a little bit of interest, but I am lighting the vegetable fields because the point of this picture was to light up this organic farm. And so I have a light over here on the right and a light over here on the left, turned down very dim because I'm actually fairly close to these vegetables. So the light is going to reflect off those leaves very, very easily. So my light is very, very dim, and yet it looks very bright. Now here are these same hay bales that you saw with the car headlights, lit with a small light that I've put over here off to the side. And one of the features of, or one of the ways to make your pictures interesting is not to stand in front of your subject, like stand right here at this front hay bale and shine my light on it. Because what is that? That's flat lighting. That's like shooting with the sun over your head. Noon, midday kind of light. There's nothing interesting. What you want to do is essentially triangulate your light. So if I'm here, then I want my light coming in from a side so that I have shadows. I want to see the texture of the barn. In this case, I see some texture of the shadows of the trees on the barn. I want to see the texture in the grass, and I'm only going to get that if I'm side lighting it or angle lighting it. Sometimes it can be difficult because you have a bank over on the side or something like that. But even if the light is off your camera and over to the side, it is going to be better. And the farther you can get to making a triangle out of your subject and your light, the better off you're going to be. The more interesting that it's going to be, and you can control your light. And again, you take your picture and you go, oh, that light's too bright. So you reset your light. You haven't moved your camera, everything's sitting on the tripod. You reset your light, turn the light down or shift where you want your shadows, and reshoot the picture with a little less light. Or sometimes you think, oh, I need a little more light for this particular subject. So you turn your light up, take another picture. You're all set up, everything's set up, your intervalometer's set up, all you have to do is punch the button.
Joyce?
Over here.
Joyce? So what's the typical exposure are you talking about for that picture? Like for the stars and for the ground?
Almost all of these are 17 seconds, f2.8 on my Nikon D810. And a small LED light, it's about 4 inches in diameter. You can get them easily on Amazon and various B&H kind of sites. And you want one that, I have one with a dial adjustment. And that gives me the most subtle and easiest to adjust light. And then I put that on a little tripod. So all those cheap tripods you have laying around that you graduated from, they come in really handy for holding on to lights. I have a hiking tripod that I put lights on because it's easy to carry. You can, sometimes I put lights on those little tripods that have flexible legs, and you can stick them on a tree, you can stick them on the ground. Lots of places you can put your light to get it off to the side. But that is my standard exposure in many of these pictures. The key is to work with your hyperfocal distance. These are single shots. So you can take two pictures, one focused for your foreground and one focused for your stars. But guess what? Then you have to go into Photoshop, and I hate Photoshop. So I do that when I have to, but when I don't have to, I want one single shot. So I need my focal point, I need my stars as pinpoints, and the hyperfocal distance is about, technically it's about a third of the way in, and there are actually apps now that you can calculate your hyperfocal distance. I don't do anything with math, I just do it all with feel, but it is possible to figure out your hyperfocal distance and literally measure it out as to where everything in your foreground and everything in your background are going to be sharp. That's what I'm looking for here. And I have gotten to know that lens really, really well as to how to adjust it. Because remember, you can't, on your focusing, I didn't put a slide in on this, but for your focusing, you cannot autofocus. You have to turn it off of autofocus. You have to be manual everything. And what you want to do is focus your lens on infinity in the daylight and make a mark on it. You can tape it there, but that's only going to be good for the stars themselves. But if you make some marks on your lens, then you can see where your infinity focus is. And especially these newer lenses that don't have a hard stop point. On my lens, I have a hard stop point. I go to the hard stop. I know I back off like 1/8 to 2/8 of an inch. And I'm at my hyperfocal distance for many of these types of shots where the foreground is near but not super close. So you set your, on the new lenses that don't have a hard stop, you make a mark at infinity so you have a starting point. And then you can back up, take a picture. Remember, you've got your nice high ISO, you can take lots of test pictures. And look at it. You can blow it up on the back of your viewfinder. And that way you can make sure that you've got everything sharp. And then once you have taken your picture, then on your replay, blow it up and look at it to see if it is sharp. You can do all of this in the darkness, in the night, just using some of the technology that we have. And you can check it. If it's not quite in focus, try it again. Think, is my foreground now in focus and my stars out of focus? So I've got to focus a little bit closer to infinity. And you can also go out and measure your hyperfocal distance. So, and there's lots of tutorials on hyperfocal distance that can help you determine that. But these really nice wide angle lenses, you have a huge focusing range to have everything sharp. And that's part of what makes this type of photography possible and fairly easy. Picture on the right, you can actually see where my light is coming. You can see where my light is coming from I'm standing obviously over here. My light is coming at a 90-degree angle towards the house. And I also am getting some light. This is a bed and breakfast. And so there were people in a room over here to the right, and they had lights on in their windows that were just a little too bright. So I had quite a lot of brightness in this side of the picture. So I had to balance that brightness on the side with some brightness from the front. So this has quite a bit of light on the actual building, trying to balance these two sides.
Joyce, how long an exposure was that?
That was my 17 seconds.
And that poor guy over there by the door had to stand still for 17 seconds because he doesn't look to be blurred from here.
He really is fairly steady. He's an old guy, and I think he was just standing there, you know, holding onto the door. I wouldn't let him come out in the lawn. He's like, it was in his 90s at that point. So he was just kind of standing there, and he didn't want to be in the picture particularly. And so I think he was trying to sort of hide. In the end, he loved the fact that he was in the picture. And I did a picture of a dog one time, and it was a young puppy, and trying to get the 17 seconds on that puppy. Fortunately, it was kind of an all white dog. And so the little bit of blur that I got in it, it still looked okay. But if you pixel peep, you can see he's not perfectly sharp. But actually, I have a whole series of these pictures blown up in 20 by 30 on metal that I've done as a display around the county. And this is one of them. And even at 20 by 30, he looks pretty daggone good. So a church by the side of the road, and I didn't have Milky Way in the direction, and I had a lot of light pollution from, there's a really steep hill behind me, and there were houses with lights. So I had a lot of light around me to contend with. And the cloud in this particular picture is actually what makes this picture, because without the cloud, it would be a building with a whole bunch of plain stars in it. But with that cloud, I ended up with a picture that came out quite cool. And again, I had to turn the lights on up a little bit brighter to balance some of the light reflection that I was getting from over the hill. And so, but I still kept the texture in the building itself. And my lighting here was all coming from the left. And so the shadows of the rocks and stuff show up, but that adds interest and texture. I could have brought a light from over here and canceled out some of the shadows, but then it would have been much more of a flat white building, and in my view, less interesting. This happens to be another bed and breakfast. And they had these beautiful flower gardens. But to light the flower gardens and the house was, I think I ended up with at least 3 lights. So I had one light for the flowers in the front, and that was over here to the right of where I was standing. And then to light the house, I think I ended up with 2 lights over here on the left, and you can see where those lights are located. And there was a little extra photoshopping done here because you could see where I actually put the light. It was very bright in that spot. So I just cloned in a little bit of blackness over it so that you didn't see the light itself. But that way I could get the light off to the side and actually light the house itself. The right-hand side of the house, the little bit of light that's there was coming from my light over here on the right. And these lights are not very bright. Other than this was bright because it was catching the leaves of the trees that were right next to it, not because the overall light was very bright. This was actually one of my early ones, and this was light from the parking lot. So people were playing around with light painting the trees with bright lights, and I just had to wait and try to catch a little bit of their light and light up the trees, while I had a tiny little bit of light. I just shone a little flashlight down at my feet on the ground, because these rocks were very close to where I was standing. So I just shone a tiny little bit of light down at my feet, which the reflection of that light was enough to light up the rocks. Anything more and they would have been way too bright. And here's the moon picture. So here, this is you can see the yellow fields here. These are native plant pastures. There's acres and acres of native plant pastures on this particular farm. And so there's, again, no way to light it. So I wanted to wait so that we could really see the color until the moon. And I got about 1/4, not quite 1/3 moon. And the moon was coming up over here to my left. And I had scouted this location, so I knew what to expect, and I was waiting for a fairly clear night, and I was waiting for the moon, the timing of the moon to be coming over the hill. As it was, I didn't time it quite perfectly, and I had to hang out for about 45 minutes waiting for the moon to actually clear the little mountain behind it. But once it did, then I have all the light that I need. I still have the stars present. And in a couple of other views I took on the farm, you could see the Big Dipper, you could see a couple of the constellations that the moon still allowed you to see. And the dimmer stars are, of course, canceled out by the moon. But you can light your landscape using the moon. And you just have to kind of decide how much lighting you want on your landscape and how big the moon is. A lot of times that first couple of days, that little tiny sliver is all you need to light your landscape and just give you enough light, but not too much. Here I was going for the effect of really being able to see the color of the flowers. And that's just another view over that same farm. Okay, any questions on shooting? Lighting. Okay. And for anybody that didn't hear, this is being recorded, so y'all will get a link to it, and feel free to use it.
A quick question on lighting.
Yes.
Do you ever use like the small LED lights that are like an inch big, just the real small ones?
Yes, like the Lume Cube. Yes. And the Lume Cube has gotten easier to use because you can now really turn it down. When it first came out, it was too bright. And now they've come out with it. It's much smaller. And what's interesting is that one of those will put out plenty of light to do this type of lighting, no problem at all. And they're easy to carry. If you are lighting the inside of a house, all you need is a candle or a tiny light. If you put a Lume Cube inside a house, it'll blow out all the windows. But a tiny, tiny little light facing the ground or literally a candle will make a really nice interior light.
So you have like the micro LED lights, like just like tiny ones that are individual or on a wire. Do you ever use any of those for creating any kind of effects?
Absolutely. I don't do a lot of that type, but I have this case of all these different little lights that I'll pull out at different times. And so you can end up collecting lights like you collect lenses, only they're a lot cheaper. And the new LEDs, the little tiny LEDs you can put in different places. They're really easy, though you want a lot of times a nice diffuse light if you're lighting a big area. If you want to light up a detail in a landscape or a detail in a bush or a particular flower, then your little tiny lights work well. But sometimes you end up with too much of a pinpoint of a light. And so I've taken things, there was one light I couldn't find a way to turn off, so I just threw enough jackets over it or sweaters that it diffused the light. I think I put my socks over a light one time just to diffuse it and soften it and spread it over a bigger area. So you can be as creative as you want.
It's like my headlamp, when it gets stuck and I can't turn it off, then I just try and diffuse it somehow.
Yes, socks work well actually, because they stay in place. But yes, grab anything and diffuse it, even a t-shirt or you know, a piece of hamburger wrapper, anything like that will diffuse light. So,
okay,
and you can then change color.
And then I'll let us move on. Do you ever use any lights in the night for water?
Yes, I've go out and do waterfalls, and Kevin Adams does a lot of waterfall shooting, and he does a lot of he likes to add different colors. So, you know, a green or a blue or something weird. I'm not really into those kind of colors, but you can cover up a light with these colored gels, and those do great on water. And you just, again, you kind of experiment because water is very reflective. And so you don't want to overlight it. And it's a little bit easier to overlight than, say, green foliage. But you take your test shot and adjust your lighting, and then you take your real shot. And if you still don't like the lighting, then turn it down or add more. Or move things around. Sometimes if you're trying to cover a large area, you might want to add a second light in the same direction as your first light, but just to cover a larger area. Or you might want to accent. I'll take little lights like that, the barn with the hay bales in front of it. I took 2 or 3 little tiny lights inside the barn itself, just to light up and give a little bit of texture to the inside of the barn so it wasn't totally black. So that's where the little lights work really well. But a lot of times you have to hide them carefully because they will be incredibly bright.
Awesome, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to begin this processing. So remember, we've taken a whole bunch of these high ISO pictures, which look terrible. So the easy way, if you're using Lightroom or whatever other organizing software, you have a way of doing like a Command F or a select. So on the Command F, which means find, when I have my Lightroom in my organizing mode, like this, I'm going to do my Command F, which shows up here in this upper right-hand bar. I'm going to put my 51-200. Sorry, I lied. I thought it was 52-100. It's 51-200. I put 51-200 in, and the only pictures that will be in here are my 51-200 high ISO pictures. I import all of these, or I have all of these selected. I do a Command A or select all, or however you want to select them, and I hit delete. And they are gone. Don't have to look at them again. So I delete them from the disk. I have no use for these. They were just my test shots. And I could have one picture and I could have 25 of these high ISO pictures that it took me to get that picture set up. Or I could have 2 or 3. It doesn't matter. They're all gone. And the only thing left is the pictures that I liked, or the pictures that were shot at the correct ISO. Then we select our favorite ones to process the rest. So, and you can see down here, now I've selected all these high ISO ones. They all have X's by them. And we've left the one that is a good picture. So the first thing I do, and everybody has their own workflow. There's a reason that I do the denoising first. I tend to use we'll go through a couple of the programs, but I tend to use the program DxO for my denoising, and that only deals with a raw file. So that has made me do my denoising first. And then I do the rest of my processing. You don't have to do your denoising first, but for many of these pictures, I think it does work well as a workflow. Now, the whole key with denoising is to preserve the detail. And denoising by its very nature actually smooths out detail. Well, what do we have with stars but a whole bunch of tiny details? We want to denoise our foreground as well. So we're going to need to denoise everything to a certain extent. But we don't want to smooth everything out. We don't want to we can smooth out some of our blacks in the foreground. That actually works okay. We can denoise our foreground and stars differently depending on how we've shot them if we've made two exposures. So the foreground, if it's shot at a couple hundred ISO or even 500 ISO, you may not have to denoise very much at all. You may not want to, but your star exposures are going to need some denoising. I also find sometimes I try different denoise programs for an individual picture because sometimes certain pictures work better in one program than another. Don't ask me why, but that is my experience. So my main one, which preserves a lot of detail, is DxO and their prime denoise. Now, if you are buying DxO as a denoise software, that makes it really expensive software. It does a lot of other things. It's not nearly as user-friendly as some of the other programs. But I really like its effect and its ability to keep stars. And a lot of my pictures have more stars than most people's pictures, especially here on the East Coast. I attribute that to the effects of the DxO Prime and its ability. Topaz, though, in this last year has come out with their AI denoise. I'm not sure, I can't remember what they call it. I've downloaded it, but I have to confess I have not done a lot with it. My brother, who's a good photographer, has had some pictures because he takes some night photos as well. He's had some pictures that really worked in it and some that didn't. I think it's true of all denoise software. Some individual pictures are going to do better than others. Nik software, which is now owned by DxO, so you have to buy DxO to have Nik, unless you have the old legacy program that I do. Their Define is not as good. There are other denoising software things out there. I have not been impressed with them so far. But I will say I haven't done a lot with this last calendar year was not one of my bigger shooting years. So I haven't played around with some of the latest, greatest software. So experiment, and I'm going to show you a couple of the things that happen. So this will be the same picture, my original raw file out of the camera. And let's see. This, I had a little thing over my notes here. So Lightroom itself has denoising software. Photoshop's got denoising software. And what I will do with these as I denoise them is to pixel peep and blow them up to 100% and really look and compare. So Lightroom is okay. It doesn't soften things up too much. This one, I don't know, you're probably going to have to take these onto your computer and really study them, because when I look at them, it's much clearer. So if we have Lightroom, I add define to it, you actually start to see some degradation of the leaves in the foreground. I do topaz on this particular one, and this is not the topaz AI, because at that time I didn't have it and I haven't had a chance to play with it. And if you blow up these leaves, you start to see them smoothing out quite a bit more. And your star detail starts to go away. And that's the thing that I particularly look at. And you'll see a softening of your stars, and you actually start to lose a few stars. So again, I'm keeping the Neff on the side, and I've done my Lightroom, and this is done with DxO. And look at how many, pick this section of the sky here, and look at how many stars get brought out compared to the original Neff. You really see every star. So if I back up and you look at the number of stars just in this one little area and the number of stars in this area, and then I'll come back forward again, and the number of stars that you see after I've used the DxO, I end up with more stars. And that's why I like that combination. It's only works with raw files. And I went over to the dark side and got a mirrorless camera. And at the time, Fuji was the one that I liked the best. I had no clue that DxO hates Fuji. So DxO doesn't work on my Fuji. So I haven't done a lot of my dark sky photography with that particular mirrorless. Not that it's totally capable. I'm just kind of hooked on the DxO and the Prime. And so DxO, I don't know what happened. They probably had a feud or something, because they refused to acknowledge that Fuji exists. But it works for all other cameras, so go figure. I do a little bit in DxO with their smart lighting and a little bit with their clear view. I don't do a ton of processing in DxO. Then I export it as a TIFF, and it goes back into Lightroom. So here is an image. It took a lot of processing. This was lit from a huge light across the street. I didn't have to add anything to it. But you look at your stars that are present, and this is after I've run it through DxO. You see a little bit of smoothing out in your clouds and a little bit of the noise, or the smoothing that comes with, not really noise, it's the smoothing that comes with denoising. But look at the detail that I have gotten with the stars. The stars are all there in the raw file, but you can really see the stars after they've been through the DxO. And I add some clarity in Lightroom because that really helps. And the dehaze really helps if you don't overdo it. So the question then is, now that you have picked your picture and you've denoised it, what color is the night sky? Think about it for a minute. What color is it? Or right now it happens to be wet, but what color do we like? We're creating, in many ways, we're creating art. We cannot see the sky the way our camera sees it. We see it differently because we have that long exposure to capture it in the camera. It's dark out there. You can see more stars on your camera than you can easily see with your eye. So you will get differing opinions as to how to process. There's a lot of discussion that the real color of the Milky Way is actually tan to yellow, kind of yellowish brown. So you have to take into consideration the lighting around your image, the amount of light pollution, the clouds, the haze, the mist, all of that will affect how your picture looks. And I process differently. Sometimes a different time I get into one kind of color, I get into that particular image, which white balance seems to be the best. It varies according to my taste for an individual picture. And sometimes I'll go back and reprocess the picture because let's say I'm in, this kind of dark blue gray phase and I open this picture up and I'm like, I don't like that anymore. I'm going to make it into more of this color. So in raw files, you can do that. Just change your white balance. Not a big deal. It is art, unless you're trying to do true documentation. And then you can get into, there's a TWAN, The World at Night, TWAN. And if you submit pictures to them, they want it sort of minimally processed and not a whole lot of extra saturation added to it because they're looking for very real sky color. But again, what color is it? Think about that the next time you're out. Then you may have to correct your perspective, especially if you're really close to a lot of these buildings and a lot of these things, trees in the foreground. If your foreground is close to you, you may have to do perspective correction. The coolest one is Photoshop, their adaptive wide angle. You go to Photoshop filter, adaptive wide angle. It's pretty amazing. Lightroom also has their transform and guided. You can make some very precise adjustments. And DxO has their viewpoint, which in the past you had to pay for on top of their DxO program. They might have included it now. So I'm using a big wide angle lens, and in this particular case, this building looks really artificial. So I needed to do some straightening. And if you're going to be straightening your pictures, take that into consideration as you're shooting, because look at how much lawn space I have here. And I'm going to lose all of that when I do my perspective correction. You're going to lose some of your foreground, and you're going to lose, you can see that I lost a good bit on the side. So you've got to shoot plenty of extra so that you can afford to lose what you're going to need to do that perspective correction. So then I'm going to go back to Lightroom for my final processing because I'm a Lightroom fanatic. I started with Lightroom. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just, this is Jeff. Let me just jump in and say we got to sort of keep an eye on the time.
Okay, so we're just about at the end.
Okay, good. Okay.
Sorry about that. Get a little carried away here. back to Lightroom, the clarity really helps. Everything else that you would normally do, any white balance adjustments you want to make, use it. I use the graduated filter tool a lot. I use the elliptical tool a lot on the horizons with light pollution. So once you're using the elliptical tool, then I can change the white balance in that area and counteract some of the yellowness of the light pollution, increase the clarity, and you'll actually bring out more stars than you would think. So there we are. These are some of the resources. Kevin Adams has a great newsletter. Actually, I don't think he's doing his conference this year. Royce Bear is doing a conference this year, and it will be available virtual as well as in person. And that's an incredible resource. He wrote the ebook that is really one of the best. There's lots of books out now, but Royce is still the top of the heap. Aaron King, he's the one that's got a great chart. International Dark Sky Association. Mike Shaw has a great newsletter. A couple of the apps that help you find your way around, and the Gaia app keeps you from getting lost when it's dark. And that's it. Sorry, I held you over.
Girl, that was awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a few weird questions for you real quick. One, do you have a dog?
Mm-hmm.
Two, so you are from Rappahannock County. Do you hike the Buck Hollow Trail? And
Buck Hollow is one of my favorite trails.
I'm pretty sure my husband and I met you on the Buck Hollow Trail.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, not too long ago. Yep. Yep. I remember.
Can you see the little
Very
dog?
cool.
She was with us. You had your dog with you.
Yep. She's sleeping over here.
Yes, and we
Cool.
exchanged all of our photographer information, and we talked for a while on that trail.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Well, good to see you again.
Yes.
Hopefully we will see you on the trail some more.
We were sitting here looking, and I was like, she looks so familiar. And then we put it all together, and I was like, yes, she's the one we met on the trail. Awesome.
Cool. Very cool. Glad to reconnect.
Indeed.
Definitely.
And this is like the perfect way to reconnect as well.
Yes. Yes. So hopefully this year I'll have some of those deep sky shots. I got myself a star tracker and I haven't got a clue how to use it.
I just got one too. I don't really have a clue how to use it either.
Good. We're all in the same boat.
Down in Buck Hollow and figure it out together.
Sounds like a plan. Actually, on top of Old Rag, sounds like a good plan.
Old Rag is one we have to do before we move.
Yes. Right now you need ice cleats, okay?
Yeah, it's probably one of the only ones we haven't done, just because you have to get to it outside the park, and we usually start inside the park. But with the weather the way it has been, we've been exploring a lot more of starting outside the park. So I kind of like it. And Old Rag is one we will definitely be doing in the spring. So we will totally meet you and go for a night.
It's nice up there in the winter. You can hike it in the moonlight. If it ever is moonlight. We don't have clouds. It's fabulous. But you have to go before the trees and the snakes come out.
What?
Okay.
Well, this has been great. This is some of the chat comments have said it was a fantastic talk. Really appreciate it, Joyce. Any other questions?
Okay.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well, enjoy, take pictures, and
Thank you very much.
get that cup of coffee out.
Hey,
Coffee.
thank you very much.